Well. So a very warm welcome to our second of this year's Art Tuesdays, and it's wonderful to welcome back Harriet Neale-Stevens, who gave a wonderful Art Wednesday for us last year. And after last week's wonderful Fra Angelico frescoes, we're leaping forward in time this week as we're thinking about gospel themes in 20th century art. Harriet is a rector on the rural western edge of Chichester Diocese, and she also has a master's degree in art history. I think 20th century art history specifically, was it? Yeah. For the University of London, and a long-standing interest in the arts and their relation to the Christian faith. So Harriet, it's wonderful to have you with us, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's lovely to be with you again this year. It's really lovely. So we've been, I know the whole art series is sort of looking at signs of glory. That's the sort of thread that's running through. So I'm hoping that we will see some signs of glory in the work that we will look at this evening. And as Catherine said, it's going to focus on the 20th and 21st century, but there are a couple of other things that I'm going to draw in for us as well from further back.
Really sorry to interrupt, Harriet. Could I should have said at the outset, could I ask everybody to put themselves on mute, please? Obviously do unmute when it's time to ask questions, but that would be really helpful. Thank you. Sorry, Harriet.
Perfect. No, that's fine. So we're going to have a look, first of all, at the Transfiguration, which so to kick off, and then we'll move to the Sermon on the Mount, and then have a look at death and resurrection at the end. But I hope you all enjoy exploring with me, and feel free, I know we've just asked you to go on mute, but feel free when we sort of perhaps come to the end of each section to unmute, and we can have a discussion and to look at the pieces together. So I've got I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of video art. So I'm going to play those. We've just had a trial run, so hopefully that will all work with the screen sharing. But we'll do that in just a moment. So I'm going to start by sharing now hang on a minute, I've got to just find it and check it's open. Just going to find my PowerPoint for you, so just bear with me just a moment. Now, strangely, it's not wanting to display that as something that I can share. Now we're back to the same problem. Hang on a sec. Right, this might be. No, why is it not wanting to do that?
I could try it again in a minute if it doesn't.
I think it's recognised it now.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
I think.
Great.
So hopefully, right. Can you all see that? Okay. It says signs of glory in modern and contemporary art. Is that showing up for everyone?
Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant. Good. It seems to just have a bit of a delay in picking up. So if I move through, so we begin with the Transfiguration, which is of course usually the gospel passage that we hear on the Sunday just before Lent begins, and it's a prefiguring of the glory of the resurrection and a glimpse of glory that we ourselves are able to look back at as we journey through Lent and through the darkness to the cross and beyond. So we won't read the story of the Transfiguration now. We're going to move on to look at this first work, which is by Viola, who many of you will know, I'm sure, or will have at least heard of. He's a well-known video artist who has permanent work displayed in St. Paul's Cathedral. And in 2007, he created a series called Transfigurations, in which a person walking towards the viewer appears to be transfigured. And the work is on a large scale plasma screen. And Viola was keen to effect in his work the total transformation of a person so that we saw a kind of metamorphosis. And writing about his work, he suggests that the word transfiguration takes on its fullest meaning when it refers to the moment a person is transformed, not by external means, but from within. So he's got a very biblical sense of transfiguration, very intentionally linking his video work to the story of Jesus being transfigured. And he's keen, he says, to portray this moment of transfiguration as the moment when a new light dawns upon someone and a person reaches a new threshold. So in order to create this idea, this vision of transfiguration in film, he had to come up with a new technology. And he built a wall of water about 10 feet wide, which pours from a trough above the performer's head. And the alignments of the technology and the water trough had to be so accurate that the water would maintain its coherence as it fell, so that it appears, you don't see the water until the person passes through it. It appears like a pane of glass, in effect. The performers that took part in his Transfiguration series were all taking part for the first time. So their performance isn't so much a practiced performance, but actually an experience that they themselves are going through. So it does have an element of immediacy about it as well. And the effect is quite eerie and mildly terrifying, as well as perhaps showing us something of this idea of glory. So I'm going to show you now a video of this work. Now it's a video of a video, so the quality is not great, I warn you, but it will give you a flavour of what he does. And if any of you know any of Bill Viola's other works or have seen the work in St Paul's Cathedral, you'll know the sort of scale that these videos are on. So I don't think that link is going to work. I'm going to need to stop sharing and then share another link with you. So bear with me a moment. Okay. Is that working for everyone?
Yeah.
Right. Just open up. So perhaps if we just pause for a moment and we can just have a little discussion about your first reactions to the video. Frustratingly, there was a better one available on YouTube, which has disappeared, where you get a much stronger sense of this person kind of appearing through this wall of water. This one that you've just seen just slightly loses the impact. But I don't know, what did you feel watching it, and how it connects with this idea of transfiguration and being changed? Do unmute if there's any comments you want to make. Has anyone seen the works, Bill Viola's works in St Paul's?
I haven't seen the works. Oh, sorry, I need to put my video on. I haven't seen the works in St Paul, but I have seen Viola's work before, and as you say, you need to be imagining it as a huge piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because the one I saw, I can't even remember which one it was, but there was one on fire and one on water. Yeah, I can really sense that water pouring down and the figure coming through, because it was sort of you couldn't see it was a person particularly, could you? It was just a shape to start off with. Yeah, it was very effective. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested in having a look, there's other work. There's an ascension that he does, where you, again with water, and instead of the water pouring down, it's sort of played backwards, so the water is going up. And this body kind of goes up with it. So he's and as you say, a huge scale. So quite shocking actually to see in real life. So that's just a little taster, but let's move on now to the next area that I wanted to look at, which is the Sermon on the Mount. Again, often a passage from the Gospels that we hear at the beginning of Lent, often on Ash Wednesday. And we picture Jesus on the mountain as he was at the Transfiguration, of course, a place associated with the closeness of God and with God's glory. So I'm going to go back to sharing that PowerPoint if it shows nicely. Yeah. So we turn first of all to, can everyone see that okay? Yeah. We turn first to a painting by Claude Lorraine, not of course a 20th century painting, but one that inspired the British painter David Hockney. And he first saw this work in New York and became intrigued. It had been significantly damaged by smoke in a fire. And hadn't ever been restored, so it was very blackened and difficult to see. And actually, having it on a screen, it's much brighter than it would have appeared when he saw it. He managed to get the museum to agree to him having a high-resolution scanned image of this painting, which he took home, and he began digitally to lighten different areas of it and to sort of restore it digitally, revealing to a certain extent what was hidden underneath the smoke damage. And then he hung his restored version, a very big painting and a big reproduction that he had. He hung it on his bedroom wall so that he could see it night and day and just live with this painting. His next stage of the project was to reimagine this painting in his own style and to create his own version of it, drawing out different aspects of the original. In an interview about the project, he said, "I am an artist. I am allowed to change things. That is my liberty." So this is what he created, and he called it Sermon on the Mount 2, after Claude Lorraine. So you can see how he's completely brightened the image. It's much more
Hockney-esque in style, but the basic bones are still there. He's not done anything too dramatic, but I think the spirit is lighter. The foliage has been cropped, and you can see a little more of the winding path up the rock, and Jesus at the top of the rock surrounded by his disciples. You can just make them out. And if we return to the original painting, you can see sort of how obscured they are, and the path is very difficult to pick out. So he draws that out of this picture. But although it's undergone a change, Hockney's version still retains the essence of the original in terms of its form and, to a certain extent, the style. From here, Hockney went on to produce a whole series of Sermon on the Mount paintings, playing with the original, but never departing from it completely. I'm going to show you now just a few of those, and I think it'll probably be nice to pause over each one and just have a look together about the different things that you see. So first of all, this, which is something quite different. Very, very playful, very, very David Hockney. I think that what I love about this is this sudden spiral that you get reminds me of a labyrinth, and the sort of the winding sense of perhaps our journey of faith. So he really draws that out, and you've got this little triangle at the top, which may or may not be the figure of Jesus. You'd have to have seen the other painting to know. So quite a naive painting, just pulling out the main details, but you've still got the mountain in the background, and on the other side, the river. I just take you back. You can see that basic structure is still there. And then another one there with a point of comparison. Something here much more angular. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the figures that were, you've got the blue and the yellow here of this lady in the bottom right-hand corner. I think she's got a child on her lap. And in this version, she's become, I think, a little tent here. And you can see a sort of, so, you know, there are all sorts of layers in these paintings. The idea of people camping out, perhaps to hear Jesus, who knows? But I think there's all sorts that you can draw. Sorry, phone ringing. Let's try and mute that. So let's turn now to the next one. Sorry, vicarage phone. Right. So here we are, another interpretation, and here we have something I think that is very different. The mountain has almost become a house, and you've got this rooftop and this triangular shape, and then these rays of glory coming from the top. For me, what I see here is something of the nativity, something of the stable in this shape, but I think it's very much up to the viewer to interpret and to see what you find in that image. So shall we just, does anyone want to sort of raise anything you've observed? Perhaps if we just rest on this one for a little bit, and you can go back between Hockney's interpretation and his first one on the right. I wonder if there's anything you see or anything that you've spotted that's of interest.
Well, I thought the earlier one looked like a snail.
Yes.
And with those three little prongs where it's, you know,
absolutely
things that a snail has.
Yes.
And I was trying to connect that with the Sermon on the Mount. Whether it was, you know, a little creature that you may find on a mountainside or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think that's a lovely observation, and you know, and I think that that sort of playfulness is very much there in Hockney's work as well.
I mean, I'd never recognised that as a David Hockney, to be honest, because I always think of him as powder blues and powder pink, you know, all those swimming pool ones he does.
Yeah, absolutely.
What stage is this in his career?
This is fairly recent. So the date, I think this is 2010. So so much more recent, and I mean still using paint, but it was about the time he started experimenting with kind of digital painting as well. And I think that some of that is beginning to. I don't think any of them are. No, they are all paintings, but he's a very interesting artist in the way that he's sort of examined a lot of the sort of the old masters, and looked at various techniques in painting and done this sort of reinterpretation and lived with paintings, and yeah, interesting work. So I don't know if you want to have a look at this one. One of the things that struck me as well, going right back to the Claude Lorraine, is this little cave halfway up the mountain. You can see with the little window, which again, you know, that there is sort of an element perhaps there of the tomb. And Hockney is still there in this painting. It disappears entirely there and never really comes back. You've got this round shape there by the stairs, by the steps, but it doesn't really come back. But anyway, over to you. Any other thoughts?
I must say, Harriet, I think I'm startled by the original, as well as because it's just so different from any depiction of the Sermon on the Mount I've ever seen.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I was kind of thinking, what on earth, I'm sure there's no answer to this, what on earth made him imagine the Sermon on the Mount with the Mount like that?
Like this?
Yes, with the sort of, you know, that kind of very tall rock, and with the crowd so far away, you think they couldn't possibly hear from right Absolutely. Up there. So I'm still just slightly reeling from the original, as well as Hockney's various takes on it.
Yeah.
And, So I'm not surprised that he was struck by it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is an extraordinary sort of concept, isn't it? Yeah.
So no, absolutely, yes, and sorry that I haven't got anything profound to say about any of them really. I just the tents reminded me of the kind of pop-up tent you get at festivals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was thinking maybe that one's got something of a kind of contemporary festival with everybody camping out, listening to the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of definitely got that feel to it, hasn't it?
And I'm really intrigued by that tent and by the kind of the at least 3 blue triangles, aren't there? Yeah, and just how much possible imagery there is in there with the 3 tabernacles and Mary and blue and and the idea that maybe and the Trinitarian sort of triangle idea.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot going on there, isn't there?
Yes.
Absolutely. I originally thought that that it was a child's wigwam, and I didn't see people. I saw well, at least I saw them sitting in deck chairs.
Interesting. Yeah. So in sorry, I just
flicked in that previous one. Yeah. So quite a festival atmosphere.
Yeah.
The one thing that struck me, maybe I'm being completely unobservant, was in the original and then the lightened version, I didn't really notice people with their outstretched hands.
Yeah.
That really comes through in the more modern, ones that he's done. And that's certainly the bit that strikes me. And I quite like that sort of outstretching towards Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, let's just go back for a minute. So very difficult to see here, and then you see a little bit on the figures on the left you see their arms a little bit, and the three figures again on the right hand side in the foreground. But then here, as you say, there's a real strong, especially with those three on the left, isn't there? And they're almost sort of falling backwards as well. And then going forwards, they're there again. And then this one, where the mountain really becomes, I mean, you've got the very strong triangle shape there. The whole mountain sort of sits as a triangle, and then you've got the other mountain in the background, and then this sort of structure, which again recalls both, well, for me, I sort of think of the Nativity, but also the Transfiguration, you know, and the idea of building some sort of structure to house Jesus is sort of there as well, and all triangles as well with these figures. So move on. So finally, we've got one last one there, which again is a sort of continuation of that last one, even more of a structure.
It's almost as if the snail shell has morphed into a house.
Yes.
Find your home with Jesus.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what was perhaps, you know, in the snail here, very much an emphasis on that, on the path up the mountain, in a sense, has changed to something quite different here. So finally, having completed this whole very playful series, Hockney created a huge canvas made up of lots of small ones. You can see how they all piece together here. This one was called A Bigger Message, quite literally. And these very vivid complementary colours jump off the canvas. And it's a very sort of, the figures have that sort of poster-like quality to them. And the background is slightly more ethereal, sort of slightly detached from the sort of firmer mountain. It's almost like that the mountain there is almost like a sort of paper cutout against this background. And Jesus here has been finally revealed and is bright and radiant. And the journey, I think, that Hockney has made, moving from the darkness and the obscurity of the Lorraine painting to the light and clarity of this painting, is in itself a kind of visual metaphor for the way in which Jesus interpreted the law and illuminated the law in his Sermon on the Mount. And certainly we get a sense of this glory being revealed in Hockney's process of exploring this painting and this subject matter.
Can I ask you something? Is he a Christian?
Sorry, say again.
Is he a Christian?
Not that I know of.
No, I didn't think he was.
Not that I know of. I mean, it would be interesting to, there is a book that was published around this time, which is it's sort of, you know, a very lengthy interview and dialogue with him, which I've not read, but I'd be quite interested to, because I'm very interested to know, as Anthony said, what was it that attracted him to the painting in the first place?
Yeah.
You know, was it the scale? Was it the fact that he couldn't see the detail and wanted to explore that aspect of it? I don't know, because it's an unusual subject matter for a non-Christian,
Yeah,
to become so involved with, I think.
whereas with the earlier artist you mentioned, what's the name again? I've forgotten.
Viola.
Yeah, that came over to me as very gay.
Interesting. I mean,
know.
he explores. I don't know. I don't think he's a Christian as such, but he certainly would say that he was interested in kind of different forms of spirituality, and particularly sort of Buddhism, and obviously his work is very bound up with these sort of life and death themes, and the body. So yeah. So let's move on. Does anyone else want to say anything at this point? We can come back at the end, but don't want to miss anything. No. So if we move on now to the next section. Oh, there's those, if you just want to have a little look at them all together and see the development. Quite interesting.
Yeah.
And you can really see here actually how, you know, although we've had those little paintings in between, the snail one and those, in the development with these three, you know, he's kept very much the same form, which is interesting. So we come now to think a little bit about death and resurrection. And this 5th century ivory casket, you may have seen images of this before, and it is in the British Museum. This is one side of a casket which was probably used for holding a relic. And it's supposed to be the earliest surviving depiction of the death of Judas alongside Jesus. So we're going to look at in a moment something contemporary on this theme, but I just wanted to have a look at this first because it's a lovely way in to thinking about Judas and Jesus. So in this image, Judas hangs from a tree. You can see him there on the left. He's limp and lifeless, and you can see the bag of silver that lies open at his feet, with just a few of the silver coins trickling out of the bag. And Jesus on the other side of the image is much more alert, almost with his eyes open, and he looks us in the eye. So it is an image with quite stark contrasts. You've got these two bodies. One is very definitely dead on the left, Jesus perhaps alive. One is clothed, one is naked. And then they hang from two very different trees. One a natural tree with this branch, and one a man-made cross. And then tucked in the leaves, you can see in this bough that comes across, tucked in the leaves there of Judas's tree, is a bird feeding her young in a nest, a sign that points us to the work of life-giving redemption that Jesus is performing on the cross, and also reminds us of the saving love that Jesus has for Judas himself. So there's a real paradox here in this story, in Judas's betrayal, because of course what Judas does in betraying Jesus is intrinsic to the gospel story. The paradox is that Judas paves the way for Jesus's arrest, which of course takes him to the cross, which in turn leads to resurrection and the revealing of God's glory. And the maker of this ivory casket seems to have understood only too well the extraordinary contradiction and providence almost of Judas's actions in betraying Jesus. So with all this in mind, we move now to a work by Cornelia Parker. And this was made in 1988, and it's called 30 Pieces of Silver. Now, it won't be quite what you're expecting. This is to introduce you to, this is a work of art that, again, actually like the David Hockney and like the Bill Viola, is revealed over time. So this is her starting point. Parker collected together 1,000 everyday silver objects. You can see them all there, all sorts of plates and cups and bowls and things. And she laid them all out in this line on the road and flattened them with a steamroller. And then she picked up all the debris and suspended it in 30 pools of silver. And actually, I'll show you now, the finished piece You can see a glimpse of it.
Wow.
You can see the silver sort of hovering in these little roundels above the floor. Much of her work is about transformation, and in a lot of her art she elevates ordinary everyday things and makes them extraordinary. So this piece, this work, 30 pieces of silver, sees the death, if you like, of 1,000 donated silver objects, everyday objects. And then, having flattened them, Parker suggests, and she says in her own words, that she has resurrected them as one unified whole, when previously they had all had individual histories. So this particular artwork is not only quite a playful riff on the 30 pieces of silver in the story of Judas's betrayal, but a statement also about death and resurrection. It says something to us about destruction and restoration. And there is something quite glorious in this finished work. It's displayed here in a church in York. I'll show you some more images there. You can see the little groups of the silver hanging from the ceiling. And it's really very beautiful and interesting also to note that the silver hangs above these gravestones that now line the church floor. So certainly making a statement about the Christian hope of resurrection through death. And I think in this whole work, Cornelia Parker's whole process of creating this piece says something to us as Christians about the pilgrimage, if you like, from individual self-worth, which is sort of symbolized in these everyday objects, then to the cross, to destruction and to ruin, when she steamrollers all of the silver. And then from that place of no hope, the place of the cross, this sense of regrouping of all the objects coming together. And there is something there about our hope of being resurrected corporately and looking forward to glorious new life. I don't know if I didn't put another image. So I can flick back to the steamroller there. And there she is laying out her objects. All quite carefully considered as well, exactly where they're going to be placed in this strange road of silver.
Hard. No, I'm not. Oh.
And then this wonderful light as they're displayed in this new way. Does anyone want to say anything about this? Do you like it? Do you like the idea? Does it feel a rather strange concept to be destroying pieces of silver in the process of making art?
I was just thinking how powerful it seems at the moment.
Yeah.
When we're just witnessing such crushing destruction, and I love it. I think it's amazing to have the crushed things being on the way to being made beautiful. I love the fact that they're just suspended a little way above the floor. So it's as if they're kind of still on the way.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's amazing.
And I think perhaps that's what gives them this sense of that there's obviously this light and this kind of, because they're shining, but the sense that they're just hovering gives them a very different quality, doesn't it? From the, not long before they were being squashed into the ground, and here they are kind of floating, very different. I think I'd quite have enjoyed the job of steamrollering them. There's something quite quite satisfying in that. But yeah, so a very, again, an interesting concept. And and interesting that it was first displayed in a church as well, a very, you know, purposefully chosen for this.
I kept
Harriet, were you able to move amongst the silver, or did you just have to look from the outskirts?
I think I have to say I haven't seen it. These are not my photos. I have seen other things, you know, displays of her work, but I suspect in this there isn't. Looking from the large photo, I'm not sure whether there would be room, or perhaps there would be. I don't know.
It would be a very different experience if you were allowed to move in the middle, wouldn't it?
It would, absolutely.
Remarkable piece.
Yeah.
I'm in awe of Cornelia Parker in the whole, how on earth she came up with that. I have no idea, but it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, forgive me for this, Harriet, but that earlier image that you showed,
yeah,
is very familiar to me because of my own work that I did on Judas, and and for what it's worth, it's actually very rare, as far as I can see, to have a depiction in any period in which you see the death of Judas and Jesus together.
Yeah,
yeah. And at one point, I kind of played with the idea of a title for my own work on that, which was "Two Deaths for Our Salvation?" ?
Yeah.
Which was playing on some, and that was, I never actually used that title, but that's but there you are. You've got two deaths for our salvation. So apologies for taking you back to that. That was a bit self-indulgent.
No, not at all.
It was a pleasure to see that image again.
I think it's a wonderful image. And as you say, it is. I'm not sure. I don't know. Do you know of any other images where you see? Is it the only one in existence?
Well, I wouldn't be knowledgeable enough to say that it's the only one, but it's the only one I'm aware of. I mean, there are many depictions of Judas.
Yeah.
Usually at the Last Supper or in the betrayal in Gethsemane.
Yeah, but to see them like this.
But to see them like that, and you know.
Yeah, it is quite extraordinary. And it does make, I mean, you know, it's 5th century as well, so it makes you wonder as well how much the Judas narrative has sort of changed throughout history. You know, the scriptures haven't changed, but the way that we approach Judas has obviously changed. But here you see, as you say, 2 deaths for our salvation. I love that.
Well, the interpretations of Judas have definitely changed over the centuries, but that's a subject for another day.
Absolutely.
The image is also one of death and resurrection, because the way in which Christ is on the cross there, his arms firmly outstretched, not sagging down as happened in the Middle Ages. His eyes are open.
Yeah.
And it was probably one of the first depictions of Christ on the cross. The early church preferred Jesus as a shepherd and other images.
Yeah.
So it is a very significant one. And but on your theme of death and resurrection there, it does combine both quite amazingly in that one figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And again with the bird and in the nest as well, you've got a very strong kind of resurrection image as well. So it does, it's an extraordinary piece. It could sort of really sum up the whole gospel, I think.
And what's quite interesting in that is, you know, often you see Jesus as being tall and lanky, nailed to a cross, and that one he's quite short and stocky, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
What age did you say that was?
That's 5th century.
5th, yes.
Yeah. And beautiful faces, aren't they? They're really characterful. It's an amazing piece. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time. If we move now to beyond Cornelia Parker, and we're just going to finish by thinking still on this theme of death and resurrection, but just to bring in Mary now. And just find.
Yeah.
So there on the left, very well-known sculpture, the Pieta by Michelangelo.
Yeah.
And we're going to look in a moment at another piece of video art by the artist Sam Taylor-Wood, a British artist who is well known for her film explorations, kind of the human condition. And her work, which we'll see in a moment, is also entitled Pieta. And it is obviously a reference to the Michelangelo sculpture in St. Peter's. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term, the Pieta image is always an image of Mary holding the dead body of her son. So we're used to seeing this image, this in art, in paintings as well. The film that Sam Taylor-Wood made is quite different. Her figures are very definitely alive and moving, and she herself is the figure of Mary, and then she uses an actor to play the figure of Jesus. The actor playing Jesus, though, is breathing. You'll see him breathing hard as he tries to maintain his posture lying across her lap. And you can see the artist as well straining to kind of bear his weight. There's a real sense of connection between the two people as they work together to create their own Pieta. And they managed to hold the position for just under 2 minutes. And that's where the art finishes. So I will show you that. I've also put there an image, another work by Bill Viola entitled Mary. That is one of the pieces in St. Paul's. So interestingly, though, this one that I'm going to show you, she made before the Bill Viola. And it is very different because it is a moving image. So let me play this for you. It's, as I said, it's just under 2 minutes. There's no sound. I'm just going to have to exit this and then open it up again. So. This works. Okay.
And to be quiet.
There we go. So I don't know what your reactions were to that piece. And the thing I think that strikes me very much is that by calling that video Pieta, we're expecting to see an image of the dead body of Jesus, when in fact we are shown a Jesus who is alive. Again, connecting back to that 5th century casket, where one of you observed that it was very much an image of the resurrection as well. And I wonder, perhaps in this Pieta video, whether Sam Taylor Wood is also playing with that idea of the Jesus who is both dead and alive. I don't know what your reactions were to that. I find it a very sort of quite strangely compelling video. What did you feel?
I thought I was going to get not like the fact that it was a breathing Jesus when he's technically supposed to be dead.
Yeah,
that actually didn't bother me, because I felt a suffering Jesus, which was fine. But it was her face didn't seem to sort of, it was like she was just an observer. I was very perplexed that there wasn't more emotion on her face.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even though she's holding the weight of his body, she's sort of quite passive as well, isn't she?
Yeah, that didn't struck me a bit discordant.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
And this is the same Sam Taylor Wood, isn't it, who made that film about John Lennon? Do you remember?
Yeah.
That kept going through my mind about that, because she subsequently married the young actor who played John Lennon. I think it was him.
That's right. Yeah. And she's interesting. And I think she's also very well known for, she did a still life where you see the things decaying. So she's very, she's interested again in that kind of, a little bit like Bill Viola, looking at the sort of the human condition, and exploring what it is to be human. Yeah.
It's probably not worthy to mention that she also directed the first 50 Shades of Grey film, but which was an interesting career move. But there we are. Yes.
Yeah.
Be lowering the tone there.
Apologies for mentioning that.
So I'm going to conclude there, but I want to allow you to take us back, if you'd like to anything that we've looked at, or just to continue the discussion, or not, as the case may be. Leave it open to you. Is there anything you'd like me to reopen on the presentation?
What was the talk about?
May I ask a question, Harriet?
Yes, please do.
I mean, what you've shown us is examples of how 20th century artists have been inspired by, played with, given fresh interpretations of previous works. Is that because that's something that interests you, or is that sort of representative of how 20th century artists have tended to approach religious themes, because drawing on past?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, actually. I mean, I think as a contemporary artist is probably quite a challenge to look at religious themes without being aware of the sort of weight of what's gone before. So I suppose, yes, I suppose I am interested in the sort of reinterpretation of those themes, which have been sort of so, set out so strongly in the sort of the history of art. And I think particularly with all these things, thinking about this theme of signs of glory, and glory very often being revealed in time, particularly in the Christian narrative and in the Gospels. Each of the works that we've looked at have had something to do with time, whether that's been using time to present the work, as in the video pieces, or in the case of Hockney, actually spending time with a piece of work and playing with it over time and seeing what emerges. And with the Cornelia Parker, there's obviously, you know, she's got this process. So you might argue with any of those works, actually, they don't exist. You know, that the whole thing from start to finish is the artwork. And so there's something there about glory and the finished piece emerging over time, which I find quite interesting as well. Yeah,
I was thinking about a point Crystal made about in the Sam Taylor Wood video, because if you look at the original Pieta by Michelangelo, I always think that Mary looks very, very young.
Yeah.
To have her son, who is very long and lean, who must be, I'm not sure what age Jesus was meant to be when he died. Do we know?
33, wasn't he?
33, something like that. And Mary in the Michelangelo is, she doesn't look as though she's mourning in some ways. So I'm wondering if that's the same image reflected in that video.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think very often in images of the Pieta, they're almost depicted as the same age. So exactly what you said, which gives a very, you know, gives a different slant on it as well. Yeah, thank you.
I say something, hang on, right, okay.
Jesus in the Sam Taylor Wood is a very strong Jesus.
Yes.
Often he is limp, and there's nothing limp about that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, that sense that he's although being presented in what we expect to be a dead form, he's very much alive. Yeah.
Harriet, could I ask Anthony something through you?
Yes, do.
He gave a talk on Judas some time ago, and there was an etched window in a church, and the etching was so like that Judas on the casket. Do you think there was any sort of reference to that from the artist who did the glass work?
I know that the piece you're referring to is a stained glass window by Lawrence Whistler.
Yeah.
In a church in Morton in Dorset that you actually go outside the church to see. You can't see it from the inside, and it was rejected by the PCC for many years and sort of was stored nearby until views changed, and then I think Nick Holton, the recently retired Bishop of Salisbury, came to install it. So I don't know whether Lawrence Whistler had seen. Probably he had. I was just thinking about what you were saying, Harriet, about artists looking at when they're working with these themes. They're probably going to go and look at what other artists have done. So maybe in the 20th century, it wasn't that different to what people have done in previous eras, perhaps.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the painting in the Mary Magdalene Chapel in Chichester Cathedral, where there are various references to previous artistic treatments. And you can see that he stole the hat from Rembrandt, and the hat that the gardening hat that Jesus is wearing from Rembrandt, and the pose from tissue. So I suppose artists have always done that. It's just using video is just a newer means of doing it.
Absolutely.
Carol, see you.
Yes, when I watched the last one, Pieta, I couldn't help thinking that the Christ figure in there just struck me as, if you like, suffering Ukraine, trying to almost passivity of the West, holding, not cradling, but just there observing. It just struck me very, maybe it's because of the situation we're in. It was a very powerful image.
Yeah.
A different way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's an interesting interesting observation, because someone else said that as well, didn't you? That I can't remember who it was, that how sort of passive and almost unmoved she is by it. Yeah.
I was just thinking as a general observation that it's very interesting that we're often told that we're in a post-Christian culture, and yet I don't know, but probably none of the artists you've talked about this evening would identify as being Christian, but they've found incredible power and resonance and symbol in foundational Christian stories. And that says something about our overlapping narratives, which I find really fascinating and hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think very often artists who, well, I don't know about this, it's just a guess, that artists who are overtly Christian and who, you know, are often producing a lot of liturgical art or art for Christian art for places of worship and things like that. But actually all of these, apart from the Bill Viola, but of course so happens that they've ended up in a cathedral, but actually all of them have produced work for for art galleries, for outdoors, or certainly not for places of worship. So again, the Christian narrative being retold, in many places. So yeah, interesting.
And what are the ages of these artists? Because I should have thought, I don't know, but I should have thought an older generation, like Hockney, etc., would be more attuned to those Christian narratives, which would have been taught in schools, whereas it's less strong in schools now.
I mean, none of these artists are particularly young now.
No.
I mean, they're all kind of well established. So yeah, that'd be an interesting thing as well, to look at real kind of contemporary art and see, as you say, what's coming out now. Yeah, I mean, I think in the teaching, I don't know, I'm not a practicing artist, so I don't know about how art is being, is taught practically. But I imagine there's still, you can't, in studying art, you can't get away from the Christian narrative, because so much of Western art was, that was the subject matter. So even if you're not wanting to study Christianity in art, you've got to, I suppose. Yeah.
I was interested in the idea that that Mary and Jesus were often portrayed as a similar age.
Yeah.
But the something about Mary not remaining sort of virginal and pure and not suffering the ravages of aging time, and because it is odd,
yes,
to paint her to look the same age as her son.
It is, absolutely. And actually, now I come to think of it, I can't immediately think of anything off the top of my head where Mary is depicted, sort of much older. I'll have to have a look actually and see what I can find.
I suppose now I've said it, as some of the icons.
Yeah.
She is a suffering Mary.
Sort of more mature, yeah, and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting observation.
There is that interesting sort of common humanity and symbiosis, though, isn't there, in that Sam Taylor Wood one? Even if she looks unmoved facially, the fact that she has to adjust her body to keep holding him, very powerful thing.
I think it's more like a living modern icon, really. I mean, some icons, they're presenting Jesus sort of blessing or whatever. And she's presenting him, living, dying, both and.
Yeah, I like that idea, that he's laid, it's sort of, she's offering him.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, I hadn't quite seen it in that way.
Yeah.
That is lovely. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Did you have anything that you really didn't like? I'm always interested in what people don't like.
Well, I wasn't particularly keen on the Bill Viola.
No.
I thought they were a bit spooky, and they reminded me of the male gaze on another male body, actually. Not that I object to that, but I did think it had those resonances.
It is I think it's quite an eerie piece. I would do have a look on, if you want to have a look on YouTube and see some of his other things, because I wanted to show you that one because it was specifically Transfiguration, but it's not the greatest quality. And there are some, they're quite extraordinary, some of the others. But yeah, I know what you mean. It is eerie, certainly. Yeah.
I wasn't so keen on the Sam Taylor Wood one, because I didn't think there wasn't enough in there to sort of get you thinking. You looked at it and you think, oh yeah, so just sitting there, and as you say, they're struggling to hold the weight, and he was struggling to keep in position. But other than that, it didn't really do anything else. It didn't make you think or have an emotion or anything really, for me.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it, as well? And also I think something like that sort of makes us also reflect on what we expect from a work of art as well, and how we might connect with it. And actually, if it doesn't do anything, that's quite interesting to reflect on as well. I have to say, I love the David Hockney. I love his playfulness, and I think there's, in contrast, perhaps there's actually a huge amount there, and perhaps he can be underestimated because of the sort of the bright, gaudy colours and the playfulness, but actually underneath there's a huge amount going on, which is worth sort of attending to.
I mean, actually, I've got a Bill Viola downstairs in the front room, and I've been toying with going down and having another look at it.
Oh,
but
right.
it's not it's 4 images. That are very meditative,
right?
And in domestic spaces. And the and sort of foregrounds the sort of the home being a place, a sacred space. Anyway, now I've said it, perhaps I ought to go downstairs.
Do you remember what they're called?
I think it's called, I'll go and have it. I'm sure it's the Passions, actually. But, but it's quite sort of narrow, and I mean it's meditative. Not. I shall go.
Anyone got any Hockneys tucked away?
Like I did, but after last year, those of you that were here last year, we had Pete Codling. Didn't we? And I did buy a print of his afterwards. I was so inspired. It was the cheapest print on his website of this, a dove and on the black background. It's lovely.
Oh, we've got that one too.
Have you got that one?
We've also got the Ark. I did see, some peat coddling Christmas presents this year, so we have the Ark.
You didn't buy the one of Trump then eating the babies? No. I thought I couldn't possibly have that hanging on my wall.
No.
Yes, it is called the Passions.
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 Yeah.
But it is not the private passion. It's a very quiet piece.
Yeah.
And different parts, different rooms, but part of the home.
Yeah.
And anyway, so they're not all spooky.
Yeah. Well, there we are.
Well, Harriet, thank you so much. There's an enormous amount for us to think about and take into these coming weeks of Lent, I think, with all the resonances in those images and the stories and the narratives. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
For another year.
Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you.
It's lovely to be with you.
And next week we have something completely different again. We have Jo Bushnell, who, as some of you may know, is the director of the Aspects Gallery here in Portsmouth, and she is going to be talking about learning, commissioning, connecting and growing through a pandemic. So that broader view of the role of the gallery in a pandemic. So do join us if you can, same time next week on Tuesday at 7:30. But for now, thank you again to Harriet, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.